back. Appreciate you hanging out with us today. We are Sports Take, JAKIB Sports YouTube Network. Rob Ellis, Derek Gunn with you on this Monday. Haven't chatted with our next guest in a while. Always fun to catch up with him. Does a phenomenal job covering the Giants. Also, just as a writer, a columnist. You can follow him on Twitter at Pat Leonard, at P Leonard NYD. And also, you got to check out his podcast, Talking Ball with Pat. It's absolutely awesome. You go to his YouTube page to check that out. He is the pride of Notre Dame and Northeast Philly and has a great setup for us. I love his background right there. Pat, what's going on, man? How are you?
What's up, man?
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, D. It's great to be with you guys. You're right. We haven't talked in a while, but boy, the NFC East is always the talk, especially around here right now, though, because obviously in the New York, New Jersey area, it's all about the Giants looking like they took a good step, but getting waxed in division, starting with those 3 losses to the Philadelphia Eagles, which I can promise you is on their minds every waking moment of this spring and summer.
Well, you had some really interesting stuff this weekend on Saquon. And we've been watching this, I wouldn't say from afar, not too far, Pat, but Saquon seems like a pretty reasonable guy. Like, I don't get a Le'Veon Bell sense here with Saquon, but I don't blame him for being a little ticked off at some of the leaks, because it seems like he's kept things pretty low, but maybe that favor hasn't been returned by the organization. What's your sense?
I agree with you. It's interesting. You hear him leave the holdout on the table. You question whether he would actually do it, whether it would come to that, but you do sense and understand his frustration with the fact that they're telling him behind the scenes, family business is family business. Let's keep it all in house. Mm-hmm. And then he's seeing leaks about deals that he is saying are misleading, that are not portraying the full picture. Now, he won't reveal the exact details of the negotiations, but I asked him directly. I said, are you saying there's not as much guaranteed money in these alleged offers that are being reported? And he said, I think you can read between the lines, even though I'm not discussing specifics. So it sounds like he believes that the Giants are trying to portray this as, we're paying you like a top running back, when the reality is something much less lucrative for a running back at a position, as we know, where guys are much less durable, their careers are shorter. And in Saquon's case, he feels like coming off a year where the Giants made the playoffs in large part because of his contributions. He feels like he needs to cash in. And also, this is another element to it, guys, which is very interesting. And this isn't the only team this happens with, but the team has rewarded some big names this offseason, right? Yep. Daniel Jones got paid. Dexter Lawrence gets paid. And without saying whether they should have or should not have, if you're Saquon Barkley and you feel like that 6-1 start really was objectively a lot about running the football with number 26, it's very difficult, I think, for him to sit on the sidelines and watch the Giants paint him as greedy when he feels like all he is owed is what he's due.
Wow. Do you honestly think he would sit out a season, i.e. Le'Veon Bell? You think he would go that far?
D, I'm not sure whether he would go that far. Okay. I do think it's noteworthy, though, that he put it on the table as an option, because I think prior to him saying that, you had to question whether he would even go as far as saying, I'll have to think about it. I do think, this is my personal opinion. Look, we know that franchise tag with the running back market, the teams have leverage in these situations. Mm-hmm. It's a fact. However, I look at the Giants. I see they get Darren Waller. They feel a little bit good about winning a playoff game. They feel like they can take another step. Their best version of their 23 team has Saquon Barkley on the field. I think he has more leverage than even he might realize, because it's impossible for me to see John Mara sitting there in the last week of July with Saquon holding out that distraction and feeling like, oh no, we're never going to have our full complement of players together. I think it's impossible that Mara is going to sit there and not walk into Joe Shane's office, knock on the door and say, just get this done already. I really don't. I don't know if I think when push comes to shove, I don't know if the organization wouldn't budge first there.
Well, on top of it, Pat, and look, this goes for virtually any player. You want your full complement, but for a guy like Daniel Jones, I mean, you need Saquon Barkley here. This is not, it's not Patrick Mahomes who can overcome guys, Tyreek Hill walking out the door and lead your team to a Super Bowl. No disrespect to Daniel Jones. I mean, he needs him bad.
Well, you said it, and that was maybe one of the more fascinating parts of his 12 and a half minutes he spent with us at this kids camp in Jersey City on Sunday. was Saquon very gently and very nicely saying, my situation is different from some others. You know, he cited Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. He cited the Eagles. He said, listen, Jalen Hurts is great. Most teams don't have the roster and the talent that the Eagles have. He said, here at the Giants, I feel like I'm a huge part of it. He even went out of his way to say, this isn't about Daniel Jones. That's not what I'm saying. But it really kind of was what he was saying. He was saying, look at the makeup of our team. Even though I'm friends with our quarterback, I like our quarterback. He's essentially appealing to us watching on television, watching at the stadium, saying, what do you see? Do you see a team where the quarterback is carrying us every week? Or do you see a team where I'm a huge part of the reason why we score and win? And so I think that rhetorical question answers itself.
All right, Pat, speaking of Daniel Jones, obviously the Giants think that he's the future. They paid him handsomely. From your perspective, what about the fan base? Are they buying Daniel Jones as their definitive leader for years to come?
I think they're buying it if he validates it this year. Okay. I think the Giant fan base, it's interesting. Even though they could be critical of the organization if things go south, they typically as a whole choose to trust the organization's decision-making until it lets them down, compared to Philadelphia, which I feel like is much more harshly honest about if something's questionable right away. Howie Roseman's hearing it right on the radio waves, on television, and seeing it in his email, I'm sure. So I think in New York, there's like a hopeful optimism about, okay, the organization buys in, so will we for now. But adding a guy like Darren Waller, and if Saquon is on the field, the fact that you have a full complement of weapons or closer to one, I do think and sense and know that Giants fans want to see it validated. They want to see Daniel Jones rubber stamp it. And you guys know what that means. Yeah. We see with Jalen Hurts, great abilities, talent, runs the ball, but then when he opens it up as a passer as well, and he becomes a guy where he can kill you both ways, now you become the MVP candidate. And Daniel Jones was more dynamic last year. He was excellent in the playoff win in Minnesota, but he did a lot more with his legs, and he still wasn't pushing the ball down the field with his arm. That was partially due to them not scheming plays for that. They didn't maybe have the same weapons they feel like they might have now. But Jones needs to become the next level of passer for Giants fans, I think, to sit down next to each other at the bar and say, we got our next Eli.
How much in your estimation, Pat, did they upgrade? I mean, we know, like, I think we think Waller from a couple years back where he was unbelievable, but he hasn't really been that same guy. Generally, how much do you think they've upgraded? Let's just go with that side of the ball to help Daniel Jones out.
Yeah. It's still a question mark, Rob, of do they have a number one receiver, and is Waller that? He's a tight end by position, but at the end of this year, are we going to say, oh, they did go get their number one? It was Darren Waller in that trade with the Raiders. I think that's their hope. I was talking to Darius Slayton recently because I saw him in the slot at practice, and he never plays there in this offense. And he said, well, part of that is now we have Darren, and he might line up anywhere on a given play, and that might create some adjustments in our personnel. That goes to show you, hey, here's our number one. Where are we moving him? And then how do we adjust our pieces from there? How much did they upgrade on offense? Eric Gray, the rookie running back, I think adds a pass catching spell, Barkley, Breda element that might help them a little bit. I think John Michael Schmitz, the center from Minnesota, they drafted in the second round. Obviously, rookies can have growing pains. I do think that helps the O-line a little bit. I'd be lying if I said, though, that I feel like the offensive line is definitely going to be okay, or the wide receiver position is clearly settled yet. They have a lot of more numbers at the receiver position. I actually think Paris Campbell is a really good add for them in a catch and run facet of what he can do with the ball in his hands over the middle. He's kind of a little bit bigger even than you would think. But I do think we're waiting for the cream to rise to the top really across the board on offense. And obviously at running back, that means he's got to be there in the first place.
Right.
So they re-signed Darius Slayton. Are you surprised they're bringing back basically the bulk of the pass catchers from last year? They signed Campbell, but the other guys are coming. Sterling Shepard, all these guys are coming back again. You surprised they're going to go with the same group?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think part of that is salary cap is they're still constrained a little bit. Like Leonard Williams on the defensive side is costing them $32 million against the cap. Oh, wow. And there's not a I know. And there's not a lot of wiggle room there unless you tell the guy he's taking a pay cut, but then you have 2 disgruntled players instead of 1. What are you going to do there? So on offense, I think what they saw is they have a lot of good pieces, also guys who are familiar for the quarterback. Like Hodgins last year only played a half season. And even though he's not a number 1 receiver, like you look at it, what AJ Brown is, or even Devontae Smith is on any given week, he is a guy who has proven that he and Daniel Jones are on the same page. Slayton, funny enough, has led the Giants in receiving yards in 3 of his 4 seasons in the league. You wouldn't know that because it hasn't been a high-powered offense. But he and Jones came in the same year, so there's that familiarity. There are a lot of numbers. I will say this, Sterling Shepard, if they get football out of Sterling Shepard, I think that'll be a bonus. I mean, he looks good running right now on grass. I just don't know if you're making the Giants roster right now, it's hard to count on him definitively being there. Okay. And then the rookie, Wan'Dale Robinson, I honestly don't know where the place is for him. He was part running back in college at Kentucky. So I'm wondering if he ends up with more of a timeshare in his role. So to answer your question, it's still lacking in that where's the Devontae Adams on this roster.
Right.
But the part of the reason Joe Schoen made the Waller trade was because he looked at the free agent class and he looked at the draft class and he didn't see a Jamar Chase in the draft and he didn't see a receiver in free agency where he could marry the finances with the star power.
Yeah, it was remarkable how late the receivers went. They went on, it was a little run on them, but it was late, Pat. Before I get to the NFC East, what your thoughts are on the Eagles, what's it been like with Rodgers with the Jets now? And now we know Giants are almost always 1, right? And the Jets are somewhere else behind them. But has it maybe moved a little bit? Have those 2 converged somewhat here in the New York, North Jersey area?
Their off-season media availabilities, are definitely more well-attended than previous years. I could say that. I mean, I think right now, in my personal opinion, it's a little bit concerning. Number 1, he had the calf injury. Obviously, he got back onto the field. But then Robert Saleh, a guy who lost 6 straight games to end last season, whose job arguably was on the hot seat last year. Yeah, I know a lot of teams are canceling this mandatory mini camp. There's a little less that you can do. I just don't love them going into the offseason early. I know they're coming back early for the Hall of Fame game. I just feel like there's a lot of pieces and new things coming together there where I would just want every moment, every waking minute available to kind of acclimate everyone. We all know how finicky and specific Rodgers is with how he wants guys running routes. And you see the eye roll when people aren't on the same page, whatever it is. Meanwhile, you have Quinnen Williams, their star defensive tackle, still not signed. And so he's disgruntled, upset. Listen, it's not like the house is on fire, but I just think there are more signs than even maybe are being reported or talked about frequently of this might not be a great honeymoon. You need to kind of get down into the nitty gritty and hit the ground running. And I think that we're not going to know a ton about them until they play the real games, but it's going to be here quicker than maybe even they realize. They have a long way to go to be the team that even I thought they were going to be when they got Rodgers, which I immediately said, I realistically think this team's going to win the division and possibly challenge for a Super Bowl berth. I just don't like some of these signs I'm seeing so far.
Interesting.
You guys get to talk to the players, but do you have access to like the GM to get their perspective on why things are moving along slowly? And what is your take on when they respond to the rebuttals of the players who haven't gotten their contracts or who are basically unhappy?
Well, I think I can speak on the Giants end. I know the general manager, Joe Schoen, what he leans on consistently when you talk to him is what he inherited. Now, you can only talk about that for so long. And I think we're already past that. So, I don't really accept that as a premise for certain things. However, the salary cap reality for the Giants and some of the allocations of resources in previous years lead to, for example, the situation you're in now where Saquon Barkley not only wants to be paid fairly, but he was a number 2 overall pick. So coming from making a number 2 pick salary versus being a 2nd or 3rd rounder. But I know the Giants' priority is to try and clean up the salary cap overall. So they're trying to do the best for their team. They're trying to reward guys they've drafted who are their own, which is something the Giants have struggled with. But at the same time, They're trying to be smart about having a long-term view. It's really interesting. In the NFL, as you guys know, it's never been more pressure cooked for the GMs and the head coaches to turn things around and get it going. And Howie really isn't helping people in division, like with the Giants, where the Eagles retool and go back to the Super Bowl after winning one. And here have the Giants still trudging through Siberia, trying to get out of this deep snow and trying to figure these things out brick by brick. And so on the one hand, it looks almost impossible to kind of turn that cruiser around in one fell swoop. But then for the Giants specifically in the NFC East, having the Eagles being so well run recently, and including how they manage the salary cap, which is something the Giants have done as badly as anything they've struggled with recently, it just makes things more difficult for them in the here and now. As far as the Jets go with Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh, but with Joe Douglas at the helm, he's coming off obviously a fantastic draft, right? You have Garrett Wilson, Sauce Gardner. I mean, how many times do you draft offensive and defensive rookie of the years in the same year? And so how about this? Your reputation goes from drafting Zach Wilson, number 2 overall, to suddenly look at all this talent this guy accrued. Right. But it's still hovering in the background but look at the capital you expended on the guy who was supposed to be your next quarterback. Now, Woody Johnson on down, we make the decision based on that failure to go all in on Aaron Rodgers. So there's just as much pressure in both sides, but I actually think Joe Douglas faces a lot more than even the outside world realizes if the Aaron Rodgers thing goes even a little bit sideways, because underneath it is that failed draft pick at the most important position in the sport.
That's interesting. All right. When you're in the eye of the storm, like we are, it's sometimes hard to be as objective, right? But I know you come from a unique stance. You cover the Giants, you cover the league, but you're also a Philly guy. And it's also been very tough for teams after getting to a Super Bowl or losing a Super Bowl. Yeah. Are the Eagles still the team to beat in your estimation in the NFC East? Where do you see the Eagles right now, Pat, as we enter the season?
I still think they're the team to beat in the NFC. I will say, I think if you're realistic about that NFC Championship game, I think you have to look at that game and say, if Purdy plays that whole game, the Niners had a chance to win that and might have been turning the tide there. And I do believe that. And I think losing Hargrave, obviously you're trying to replace it. You're trying to replace things on both sides of the ball on both lines as the Eagles, but you're still very strong up front, which is where a lot of the teams that even talent-wise feel like they're starting to catch up over the course of 4 quarters, they just can't hang with the Eagles O-line and D-line. I do think the Niners are right there, and I think getting Hargrave, to me, is one of the quieter, it's not the premium position necessarily. I think could end up being, when we look to playoff time, one of the more important moves made by any team this offseason. But I just think the Eagles' ability, once they traded for A.J. Brown and the combination of the draft picks they've combined with guys that they already had here, veterans, the fact that Kelsey came back, and Jalen Hurts then growing into his own, and Sirianni and even his staff creating the plan that allowed them to flourish last year. A lot of coaching turnover, obviously, at offensive and defensive coordinator. So to me, that's the one question, especially when you look at these early division matchups and coming out of the gate, can they keep it going? Can they continue the way that they attack teams? Is the offense and the defensive game plan going to adjust? Or is it going to stay consistent to the strengths of the roster? Mm-hmm. But I do think that the Eagles are the team to beat in the NFC still, but I don't think they can rest, because I do look at that NFC title game and I see a Niners team that with a healthy quarterback for 4 quarters arguably could have won that game.
Mm-hmm. All right, there's the journalistic side of Pat Leonard, and then there's the fan side of him as well. And because I go through this, because I'm from Wisconsin, I'm a big Packers fan, okay? So I got to ask you, how do you handle the emotional flow? Because you get to cover it twice, Eagles, Giants twice. How do you handle it? We're family here. You can tell us. How do you handle that?
That's a great question. I'll say this. I just get a warm feeling about going to the link, sitting down and having a soft pretzel. Like sitting there, watching a game for the team I grew up rooting for free. I'm getting paid to do it. and I'm eating a soft pretzel that I used to put a quarter in my pencil case every day at recess to have at St. Cecilia's in Fox Chase. So it's hard for me to beat that. I'm not going to lie. When I went to Notre Dame, I was a 1 week I'd be in the stands as a student and a fan. And then the next week I'd be in the press box as a student reporter for the Observer daily newspaper. And that was a real education for me, and having to turn it on and off and having to sit there and try and be as objective as you can. And so when I got to hockey and I covered the Rangers, I remember covering a Winter Classic in Philadelphia at Citizens Bank Park, Rangers, Flyers. And that was one of the first moments that I felt the result didn't matter, even though the Philly team was, it was an oddly unemotional response to everything that was going on. I never want to be the guy who doesn't feel anything when I watch, because we do this because we love it.
Yeah.
Right.
But as you guys know, there's so much animosity to this rivalry that I'll never forget. One of the guys on when I used to do Daily News Live up here, we were talking offset about how I was from Philadelphia. And then we go live and we were picking against the spread. This is years ago, like maybe, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago. And I picked the Eagles to win the game. And the guy turns to me and goes, "Well, you're just saying that because you're from Philadelphia."
Oh.
And I was outed. You could see it on social media. Oh, Eagles fan. So I don't know if I'll ever live that down, but I try to present the objectivity as much as possible.
Yeah. Well, here's the way I look at it, Pat. And I consider myself I have no problem bringing the hammer down on the local teams either, because I don't know about you, but that's the way we were as kids. Like we wanted all the Philadelphia teams to win, but me and my buddies would call people out if they weren't getting the job done. It wasn't this unconditional love that you might get like in St. Louis for the Cardinals. Like, it's all right, go get them next time. It was never that way. So it was always easy for me to just be that guy, personally.
No, I have to be careful how I say these things, right? But that's what I was saying earlier about when you asked about how do the fans feel about Daniel Jones. I really do feel a default in New York, New Jersey with Giants fans often is trusting the organization, often blindly, especially when things started going south, when I first got on the beat in 16, 17, 18, 19. All of the things that you told fans were happening that were negative, fans were telling you that you're an Eagles fan, you're from Philadelphia, you're making this up, you get clicks, you're creating headlines. Now you talk to a Giants fans in 2022, they'll tell you all the things that went wrong in those years that they were telling me I was making up, right?
Yeah.
In Philadelphia, the fans are the first ones to say it.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about Philadelphia fans. And I think any true fan of a team, like you said, that's how I was raised too. The Phillies eventually winning the World Series for me as a kid in my lifetime was so much sweeter for all of the difficult years, going through after the 93 team, and all those 90s teams. And, you'd hear the name of the team and put your head down half the time. And, but you don't spend those years saying that the team's okay. You spend those years sitting with your friends and complaining about the mistakes that were made and going through. This is why everybody likes to play GM, because the real fans want to make their teams better. So I always respond well to any fan of any team that is being honest about it. And I think the interesting element now in New York is because it's been so bad for so long prior to last year where they eked out that playoff appearance, Giants fans finally are starting to come around to enough of this, figure it out. And so that's why they're so excited by Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll, because they seem to be doing things differently. But again, in division, the Eagles and the Cowboys present a stiff test.
Yeah. Pat, with a new chain of command with Schoen and Daboll, do they do a good job of reaching out to former big name alumni player? One thing the Eagles do well is no matter who the coach is, they always have a contingent of former players that they always have in the building, always have at special events. Do the Giants follow suit along those lines?
They do. I will say, to give him credit here, Joe Judge started that when he got here. He came in and we came to a practice one day, D, and we walk out and, half the team had the white jerseys on, half the team had the blue, offense, defense. And then there were about 8 or 9 guys who had black jerseys on. And we're thinking, whoa, what is that? What's this? A new concussion protocol? What's going on here? And when you looked closer, they were black practice throwback jerseys with the name and number of like a Giants Ring of Honor player. And so if a guy if a linebacker, had a good week, like he might get, the Banks jersey or the Carson jersey or whatever. And he was really they spent time in meetings educating the players on guys past at your position and what they provided. And if the guy was still around, especially in the area, linking them up. He started bringing more guys down to the stadium and to the facility to give speeches. And I know last year, then they kind of kept that going, especially guys who were more recent, even like OCU Manura, Justin Tuck, I think was in the locker room last year, giving a big speech to the team. So that has been a big emphasis of this new regime. But I did see an uptick of that when Joe Judge arrived in, what would that be, 2020?
Okay.
That's interesting. Yeah, you don't hear a lot of positives about Joe Judge in his time there, Pat. But yeah, he gets one of them, I guess, right there. Yeah.
He would have. Hey, I'll tell you this. Listen, nobody's perfect, and obviously, the offense here, was unacceptable. But he was a very good CEO, and if he had like a Brian Daboll as his offensive coordinator, which honestly would have happened if he could have gotten him out of Buffalo, he'd still be the head coach here. I mean, that's my opinion.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. If you had to rank, because we had Chris Franklin on from NJ.com a little bit earlier, I was surprised at his order. You were ranking the NFC East. I'm assuming you'd go Eagles 1, but what would be your pecking order after the Birds?
Eagles, Cowboys, and then Washington Giants in a battle there. I do think Washington has potential for an all-time disaster this season, but their roster's not. It has talent, even though they keep finishing down there in the basement. It's not like they lack talent on the roster. If the Giants stay healthy, they can challenge for that second, third. If the Giants have the type of injuries they've had in the last several years, which it seems like an annual occurrence, and I know it's football, but they really struggled with key guys going down. Last year, a lot of it happened in training camp in the beginning of the year. Then it could be a threat because while they can't beat the Eagles and the Cowboys, they've had their way with Washington pretty much. Okay. Washington caught them for a tie last year. I think, but my answer to you, not to waffle, would be Eagles, Cowboys, Giants, Washington at the moment. I believe that's a repeat of last season, which never happens. So I guess I'm going to be wrong.
Well, I mean, how crazy is it? Nobody's won this division back to back since, what was it, like 04, 05? It was the Eagles during Andy Reid's run.
It's absolutely insane. That's again why it's so frustrating for the Giants that the Eagles have reloaded in such impressive fashion, because usually what goes around comes around, and now not so much. So the Giants feel like they're getting a little bit better and they're building something, but it's hard for them because they're trying to take this long-term view, but they want to capitalize on their recent winning, and the Eagles still look so tough.
Yeah, no question. Well, listen, Pat, tell people where they can get the podcast, Talking Ball. We see it right behind you. Yeah. I know it's awesome. I know your coverage is great, and I'll tell people where they can follow you on Twitter. But let's talk a little Talking Ball. Where can they find it?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, at least once a week, typically having guests on. Darius Slayton joined us recently. I had Jeremiah Searles, a former lineman who played for Daboll, now represents John Michael Schmitz after the pick there, and great pre-draft, post-draft, and we'll be doing a lot during training camp. So Talking Ball with Pat Leonard. It's on the Believe Network. It's on my YouTube page. Every full episode, it's at PL on NFL on YouTube. And then you subscribe anywhere you get your audio podcast. So Apple, Spotify, and really anywhere else you should be able to find it. Really appreciating you letting me plug that and having me on, because I love talking ball and I love talking birds. And obviously the NFC East is only going to get more interesting here. So
yeah, Pat, keep it up, man. At P Leonard NYDN is how you follow him on Twitter as well. Oh, by the way, Pat, let me squeeze this in before I let you out of here.
Yeah, what's up?
My cousin's daughter is getting married in Notre Dame, not this weekend, but next. Okay. I've been there a bunch of times, but I haven't been in a long time. Other than the linebacker lounge. Give me a couple good spots, brother. Hook me up. I need, where am I going to have a good time?
You're putting me on the spot. I love it. So,
Yes.
okay. When I was a student there, we
Yeah.
did not have a thoroughfare connected to campus to just walk out and have a cocktail. You know, you had to get a cab everywhere.
Right.
You weren't getting Ubers back then.
Yeah,
either.
yeah,
You were
yeah.
getting a cab.
Uh-huh.
Right now, there's Eddy Street Commons. You can walk up right straight from the main building, from the dome.
Okay.
Just walk straight off campus, and you're walking right into a magnificent, spotless area of restaurants, food, shops, an extension of the bookstore, some condos and apartments there. But the easiest way, especially once you get there, you want to park and you want to walk. And such a beautiful campus. I never want to go too far either, but that's where I would say to spend some quick time. And then also, I think for you got Rocco's Pizza and you got Parisi's as well. Some
Taking
great
this all down.
Italian.
Yes.
And then Corby's, obviously. Corby's. If you've never been to Corby's, you got to hit Corby's.
Do you go back often just to rekindle some of the old moments, or no?
Not as often recently as I would like, but now that
Okay.
my kids are, my son's now 7 years old, and we got to get the trip in. It would have happened probably right around when COVID hit. So now, it's time to take the kids and the whole family out there and to do it right.
Bye week. Giants play on a Thursday. You got to do it, man.
I know. It's an amazing place, and new athletic director now too. So a lot of turnover, but should be fun. Should be a great season for the Irish.
Awesome, Pat. Appreciate it, man. Thanks for a couple minutes. Looking forward to talking to you again.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, take
Be
care.
good, Pat.
Take care. That's Pat Leonard. Good stuff there from Pat. Good information there. I'll tell you what, Gunner. Saquon's not happy, and you just wonder how this manifests itself if they don't get something done. I agree with Pat in that they don't want to mess around with this one like this. And I know the hesitancy of teams to pay running backs, but you don't want to play with him too much here because if that thing goes sideways, they're going to cave in offensively without him.
Well, I mean, but this happens with players all the time. You know, players take a stance, ownership takes a stance, and 9 times out of 10, the player will eventually sign their franchise tag, or the two sides come to a meeting of mind before the deadline. So that's why what would he have, like a little more than a month before the deadline?
Yeah, the 17th of July.
So, what's said today will change tomorrow and will change the next day. But I do think from a Giants perspective, if there's one thing that Saquon said, is that they need to rally the troops and say, hey, everybody, keep your mouths closed.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody leak any more information. Sometimes organizations do that to try to put pressure on a player. But when you respect a player of Saquon's caliber, you don't do that.
Right.
You put that information out there. So there should be an edict from the top. Keep your mouths closed, and let's take care of this behind doors. And who knows? Maybe we'll get this done tomorrow, maybe next week, but let's get it done way before this deadline. So we're not talking about this in training camp in August. We're talking about trying to catch the Eagles in the division.
Yeah, makes sense. All right, let's do this. We talked about, looking at the best rookies of the 2022 class. Let's get a timeout. We'll do it when we come back, Derek. All right, we'll do that. We'll keep the NFL talk rolling. Got a bunch of other stuff that we can get into as well when it comes to the NFL. Great story, too, out of the Canadian Open. I didn't think we'd be talking about this, but it's a pretty wild story from yesterday as well. So we'll do all of that, birthdays, movies. We'll close it out in style like we normally do. That's Derek Gunn. I'm Rob Ellis. We are Sports Take, JAKIB Sports YouTube Network. We're going to talk right now about Razor technology. Yes, Razor technology, and in particular, data estate. Data is everywhere in business today, but when it's locked away in silos, it can't be efficiently used, and businesses don't have time to wait for the insights that shape decision-making. Razor Technology's data management not only integrates data from wherever it's generated or collected, but provides a uniform structure for storing, interpreting, and distributing it to decision makers. Razor helps businesses transform their model data, use it to populate real-time dashboards, and create shareable reports that highlight key areas of progress as well as warning signs in need of attention. Smart data analytics and the tools to make data insights easily digestible help businesses of all sizes and types discover where they could be untapping significant savings. Razor Technology can help you break down your silos and fully realize the value of your data to drive growth for your business. Learn more at Razor Technology by calling them at 866-797-3282. That's 797-3282, or visit them online at razor-tech.com. That's razor-tech.com.